To have passion in life is everything.
What's your Everest?
Oh,
Is it
yeah.
that 200-inch buck?
They just look so impressive when they're wide.
Especially running away.
Welcome to this week's episode of Eastman's Elevated.
It's like a think tank for outdoor activity.
Sounds exactly like my hunting. Just always thinking about it, always trying to evolve it and make it better.
Here's your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, what's happening, guys? Got a brand new Eastmans Elevated podcast for you. So this week I have on Eastman's own Brandon Mason. So he's been on the podcast before. I really like Brandon. He's got a good set of ethics on him, and the guy is really intelligent. He's a former biologist. And he does a really good job of articulating good points. He's a great storyteller, just a good all-around guy, too. I always really enjoy our conversations, whether we're on the phone or in person at the office or having him on the podcast. So this year he did a Alaska float hunt, and we talked about it before he went because I had done one 2 years ago, and so I tried to kind of give him some heads up, and we talked about gear, and we talked about strategy and some different things, and then he went on this float hunt and just had a great experience. We talked one day for probably an hour on his Alaska float hunt, and I wish I would have recorded that podcast, but this one was even better as we were able to go over the same stories and same points he made. And just a super guy. I really like Brandon, and so thanks to him for being back on the podcast. Our sponsor for today's show is Bloodsport Arrows. So been using Bloodsport Arrows here for a couple seasons. They have great straightness tolerance on their shafts. They also have great weight tolerance. They have good components. I've had good luck with their arrows, and then they also have some broadheads lines, and they have a fixed blade like I used in Idaho, which is a 3-blade fixed blade broadhead that did really well for me. And then they have a couple different types that I've been using the last couple seasons. They have one that's a straight expandable. It opens to 1 7/8 inches. It's a 2-blade. The thing is so aerodynamic. It flies so well for like antelope or any long-range game, where you're dealing with wind drift. These broadheads are money, and they're just devastating. I've had really good luck with them. But it's a 2-blade 1 7/8 inches, and the blades really disappear into the ferrule. So there isn't much blade sticking out to catch wind and throw your arrows off, to wind drift. So they're just a really accurate broadhead. They also have another line that is their grave diggers. And that's a 4-blade, and it's a hybrid between an expandable and a fixed blade. So it's got an inch fixed blade on it, and then the other way, it's got an expandable 1 7/8 inches. So it's actually a 4-blade broadhead. I've been using these on bigger game animals like elk, and I've even used them on mule deer, and they'll work on about anything, but it's devastating. You hit something with those, and they just do not make it that far. So check out Bloodsport. Thanks to those guys for sponsoring the podcast. Over there at Eastman's, I know the guys have been making the rounds at the shows, so they've been doing that and keeping busy there, and we've got a bunch of cool things in the works. I think Dan Picard and Guy Eastman went on that Marco Polo to Tajikistan. We recorded a podcast on it, and they also have it as an episode of Beyond the Grid. That's going to be coming out here soon, so we'll be on the lookout for that, and also release that podcast, which is just a great one. It's with Dan and Guy, and then Ike sat in on it. We just had a great time there at the office talking about it. What an extreme hunt. It was just unreal. So that's cool. That's coming out. Been working on the podcast a bunch. We've had a bunch of good guests that I'll be releasing here soon, and more to come in the future, and I think we're putting out really good content. I'm really proud of the product that we're putting out, and it's one of those things I've just been working on to improve, and it's just slowly but surely I'm getting better at it. And I've talked about it before, but it's weird. You have to be in the moment, with your guests. You can plan all you want, but you have to really play off what your guest is saying. And when your guest makes a good point, it's being able to highlight that point and expand on it a little bit. And so, I think I feel like I'm getting better at it and improving at it, and I'm really proud at the content we're putting out. And thanks to you guys for all the support. I just can't wait to see where this podcast goes over the next year. And with that, I've been talking long enough. Let's get this podcast rolling. So it's me and Brandon Mason. We're talking about float hunting Alaska, Eastman's Elevated. Here we go. Okay, I'm here with Eastman's own Brandon Mason. Brandon, thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian. It's been a while since we were able to do this, and you came down here a couple weeks. What was it, before Christmas, I think, or a week or two before Christmas, and we were able to do a bunch of podcasts with the guys in the office, and we tried to do it then, and now it's February, and we couldn't do it then because I was sicker than a dog and kind of had a hoarse-sounding voice. So yeah, I'm glad it finally worked out.
Yeah, well, we've been trying to connect. We both did an Alaskan float trip, and you just did yours this last season, and you just had some incredible stories about floating down, and you also learned a lot of lessons, as I learned a lot of lessons. And so I just wanted to sit down and just have a conversation about float hunting Alaska and benefits and things people can prepare for more and what's to be expected. So when guys out there are planning their own do-it-yourself float trip in Alaska, that they have some more knowledge going into it.
Yeah, that's the thing with a lot of these types of major adventure trips, whether it's a Intermountain West type trip after elk and you live out in the eastern part of the United States and this is a once-in-a-lifetime deal, or it's guys like us that live out here but we go up to Alaska or Canada and go on some other unique adventures. Most of the time, these types of trips are once in a lifetime because of the cost and the logistics. And so the unfortunate thing is that you go on these trips and you learn a lot while you're on them. And about the time that you're done with the trip, you've really figured out how you're supposed to do it, and then the trip's done. And so, in kind of the knee-jerk reaction is, oh man, next year when I'm up here, I'm going to do this and that. And then you go, oh wait, reality just hit me. I may never get to come up here again. And so the nice thing about us being able to share a few tidbits here and there is hopefully if somebody else is planning an adventure like this, it'll maybe take, maybe a couple of variables out of the way for them so that they can be ahead of the game, enjoy their trip more, and maybe, be a little more successful.
Absolutely. And I do want to get back up and experience it again. And we floated a couple rivers systems. Like, we weren't too far away from each other in the river systems that we floated, so we were in the same type of terrain, and we were both hunting for moose and then caribou if we saw them in there. And you just had a great trip, and you guys harvested one moose?
Not a moose. We got a caribou.
Got a caribou.
We
okay.
had a bunch of close encounters with some moose. Either the big ones that we saw, we couldn't get in on them, or the ones that we had some crazy close encounters, which we can talk about, they just were sublegal bulls. So in that area, you have to have, in a lot of parts of Alaska, you have to have a minimum of 50-inch spread and at least 4 brow tines on one side, or excuse me, not and, it's either or. So 50-inch spread or 4 brow tines on one side. And the bulls that we had the best encounters with were just not quite there yet. And that's another thing too, that's an educational process. Is just field judging them, because it's not like you get to hunt moose every year. The most sportsmen in the United States, or even Canada for that matter, they don't get to hunt moose every year. It's kind of one of those bucket list species, so to speak, I guess. And again, like we said, about the time you figured out really how to do it right, your hunt's over. But places like the Alaska Fish and Game website, they have some really great moose identification videos and kind of test your skills on field judging and making sure you're legal. And, as with anything, no matter what you're hunting, if you're not sure, don't shoot. Just don't go there. It's not worth it.
Yeah, you can't make a mistake up there. And trying to judge those moose that you don't look at all the time is difficult. And so for me, 50-inch wide is legal, but really he's got to be about 55 for me to say, positively that is a legal moose. And so, yeah, that was kind of my learning curve as well, as learning how to judge those moose and what a 50-inch moose does look like. And best case scenario, he's got 4 brow tines or 4 points on one of his brow tines, and he's legal. There's no doubt about it. And those big ones, when they get to 60 inches or bigger, there's no doubt in your mind, it. But some of those ones that are on the border, whether they're 48 or 52, we just had to pass them because I didn't know if they were legal or not.
Yeah, we made a rule of thumb on our trip that, and I even talked to Guy about this before, we went up there because he hasn't done a float hunt, I don't think, but he's, been up there and hunting. And the good rule of thumb is if it's an iffy bull from a spread standpoint, don't even look at the spread. Count those brow tines. And if they have the brow tines, it's game on. If not, then just move on, pass them up. There's not, per square mile, Alaska has the least dense wildlife populations, I think, of any place in the United States, but there's still a lot of animals, and most of the time you're going to see a fair amount. And we saw, I think in our 10-day trip, we saw 9 or 10 moose, which on a moose hunt's quite a bit. And it's just not worth the risk of, is he 50, is he 48, is he 52? Count those brow tines. And if he doesn't have the brow tines, just don't take the chance. Now, like you said, when you get to that 60-inch plus, there's no guesswork. They're just big, and you don't have to worry about brow tines. We saw one on the trip that I was kind of being stubborn and sticking to my recurve for some reason. I had this thought in my head since I was in my upper teens, and I'm 41 now, so it's been quite a while, that someday I want to go to Alaska and I have to do it with my recurve. I have no good reason why that was a goal. I have no rational explanation, but for some reason I wanted to do it with my stick bow, and we took a rifle with too for Casey, and Casey's also a traditional archer like I am. At times when we're not shooting our compounds or whatever, and we took one recurve and one rifle, and just thought that way we can each shoot either if we want. And but I was going to be pretty stubborn and stick to the recurve, and I was pretty disciplined until we saw a giant moose. And if I could have got my hands on the rifle fast enough, that bull would have died with the rifle. He was so big. I've been calling him cartoonish. I mean, his body size, Brian, was probably, and Casey's a wildlife biologist, as am I, and so we kind of, been in the field a lot, been in a lot of situations where we know what we're looking at. And he was 20 to 30% bigger body size than any other moose we saw. I mean, he was just enormous. And his rack was, he was upper 60s easily for spread. And it was just, like I said, he looked cartoonish. It didn't look like what we were looking at was even a real animal. He was so big. And so I was willing to forgo the recurve on that. But Casey, the rifle was in Casey's raft. And by the time Casey got his raft stopped on the gravel bar that the moose was on, he was gone. And I couldn't do anything about it. But it was cool to see him, though.
Yeah, I also got the opportunity to see a couple just gigantic bulls, and one that just stood out that, like you say, that exact description of cartoonish. The body size was absolutely gigantic, and there was just no doubt about it, and just such an impressive animal to see. And like you, I had a great experience up there. Like, they don't have a lot of animals per square mile, but those animals use those river drainages to travel, and so their populations are a little bit more condensed. But yeah, I think we saw 10 different bulls on our hunt, and like I think out of the 10, 4 of them were legal shooters that we thought were either had the 4 brow tines or were over 55 inches, and seeing those big ones is so impressive. You'd almost do anything to catch up to them, but they just the big ones zigged when we needed them to zag, and so we were the same way. And we called in one that was just right on the border. He looked to be about 50 inches, but like you say, we just had to pass him. We didn't know if he was 48 or if he was 52, and you just can't make a mistake up there. And he only had 3 brow tines, so it was too bad. If he had 4, I think he would have caught an arrow.
Yep, exactly. It's tempting, and you're on this once-in-a-lifetime trip, and you really want to come home with something. But it is, no matter where you're at, it's not worth taking an iffy shot. But Alaska, their department has 0 flex in their rules. So that if there's a place that you do not want to break a game violation, it's Alaska. And I've heard some horror stories of what guys have, even if it was just ignorance and an accident, what happened to them, legally. It's just not a good situation. So if there's any doubt at all, don't shoot and wait for the next opportunity.
Yep, absolutely 0 tolerance in Alaska. You have to make sure you're right to the letter of the law up there, because they take it serious, and rightfully so. It's a great resource they have there, and they don't want guys cheating or breaking any rules. They definitely don't want anybody wasting any edible meat up there, and so they take their laws really serious, and you have to do the same, which we all do everywhere we hunt, but even more so in Alaska, as those wardens will fly over and check on you, and they really take it serious up there, and so you have to make sure you do everything the right way.
Yep, exactly. And plus, when you're doing these DIY float hunts or drop camps or whatever, you want to leave the place as pristine and wild as you found it when you got there, and so you don't want to make any mistakes. You want to leave a clean camp. You don't want to have an oops as far as shooting the wrong animal that's legal. It's just, puts a black eye on the rest of the hunters out there, and could potentially in the future lead to more limited opportunities for sportsmen up there. So, we owe it to each other to be responsible, to take care of the meat the way we're supposed to take care of our campsites the way we're supposed to, and just, leave it as pristine as you found it, or better if possible. Pick up litter, obviously. That's kind of the hunter safety courses that that we all learn, and that they teach you, that leave it better than the way you found it, if possible. And that's what we try to do. And thankfully, honestly, I owe a lot of that to, part of it's the way I was raised, but some of the resources that a gentleman by the name of Larry Bartlett has put out over the years, where he's really passionate about leaving those pristine places pristine. In fact, his company is called Pristine Ventures, and that's where we rented our rafts from. And he's very, very strict and diligent about anybody that he helps out, as far as leading them on their way to a DIY adventure, that he really performs some surveillance on the river corridors that people use to make sure that he's not leaving an impact on them, and a negative impact on them. And I really appreciate it, and I learned a lot from his books and his DVDs and everything, and that really helped prepare for the hunt.
I used the same resource, and that's where we bought our rafts that we used for our adventure as well. He built some great rafts for Alaska. But you're right. Leaving it better than you found it, or as pristine as you found it is a giant deal there. And you get in those river valleys, and I've never experienced a vastness as I did when I landed in Alaska, and I'm 100 miles from the nearest road. Like you get in this valley, like the valley I live in the Madison Valley. It'd be like landing here and looking around, and there's no houses, no cabins, no roads, no trails, no humans. You are in this giant Alaskan valley, and you have it all to yourself, and that's a really neat feeling, and it's a neat experience to go down there, and it's so pristine that I never saw one piece of trash. I never saw one sign of humans. I never saw anything there, and so you want to leave it as good as you found it. And also, like how much would that sour your experience if you saved up and you did this once in a lifetime, and you ended up making a mistake, killing a 49-inch bull, and it got confiscated, and the tickets and the repercussions, not only the tickets or the repercussions, but what about the memories that you've waited a whole lifetime to go have this experience, and then you taint it by making a mistake, and so you just can't be wrong. You have to be right 100% of the time.
Yeah, it's just not worth it. And then, not just the memories that you're always going to have that would be negative from a type of experience like that, but you know how it is. Everybody whether it's through work or family or friends or whatever, knows that you're going on this epic trip. And for the next year and a half, you're going to be answering the question, hey, man, how was your float hunt? And you have to tell them, well, I shot the wrong animal and I got ticketed and it was really a negative experience. And who wants to tell that story? Not me.
Yep, it just isn't worth it. Embrace the experience, know you're right, and make the right decisions while you're there. But that float hunting is such a great way to hunt Alaska, as it is so vast, and you have to use a float plane to get around. And like a drop camp, if they drop you in an area, can either go really well or it can go really bad, where you're not seeing animals. And so like having a float trip allows you to travel these river drainages, and like we were saying before, the river drainages are where, as the moose use them as travel corridors in and through there, so that's where those moose are, and so you get to travel down in the exact country that those moose like to use. And so I just found it a great way to be mobile and be able to hunt in different locations, and those moose are so big that you can only hunt, they say don't shoot a moose more than a mile from your camp, and so for me I think that meant 2 or 3 miles. That's just the way my head works, is that if I kill a big moose, I will get him back to camp every stitch of meat, and that'll be my experience. But you really can't venture too far to shoot a moose, as far as like backpack hunting and things, that it has to be close to a river system or close to a landing strip where you can get the moose out of there.
Yeah, I mean, besides the fact that they're just a giant animal that is really hard to comprehend how big they are until you see one down. I shot a moose when I was 18 years old in North Dakota, where I'm originally from, and drew a once-in-a-lifetime tag. And obviously everybody knows they're big and everything. I mean, that's why you see a big dog and you'll say, man, that thing looks like a moose. Well, it's a standard term for big. But until you see one laying there that you got to process, you can't comprehend how big these animals are. So that's number one. And number two is that country up there is so hard to hike in. That tundra is just rough. I mean, I've heard various expressions on how to, from different hunters on how to describe how hard it is to hunt or hike across the tundra. And my own, I would say conservatively that a mile on the tundra is like 3 in any other terrain, at least. And it is just, in fact, we landed on a remote mountain lake on a float plane, and when we got dropped off, and we had to pack our 2 rafts and our, everything we have for 10 days for surviving and our hunting gear and everything to the little creek that kind of streamed out of this remote lake and turned into the bigger river. We hit a couple confluences and everything along this river system, and just packing that equipment and our rafts and everything from the lake to the better, wider part of this creek that we could start float hunting down the next day or the day after was, I'm trying to remember, I think it was less than a half a mile, and it kicked my butt, man. It was like, we had to make, I think, 3 trips back and forth, and by the time we got the tent set up that night, I was like, holy cow, this is only day 1. We haven't even started the float yet, and we're tired. And it's just, that tundra it's really neat country, but it is so hard to walk through, and it can be really dangerous too. There's a lot of, I don't remember what the official term is, maybe you do, but there's some, almost like we hear about a false summit in the mountains where, there's one more mountain peak behind the peak that you thought you were hiking to, which turns out not to be the summit. There's like a false ground there that's almost like a floating tundra, and there's people that have died up there, disappeared, gone forever, that nobody ever heard from again. And so you really got to know what to look for when you're hiking across the tundra too, because it can be life-threatening. I mean, it's really, and once you know what to look for, you can kind of spot it. But if you're just aimlessly walking and not paying attention, you can disappear with your pack on and everything, and nobody will ever hear from you again.
Oh, wow, that is so scary. Yeah, it's I can't remember what it's called, but you're right. It's like a false ground, and right underneath it, it's all water, and so you sink through it, and then you're gone. It's like being underneath ice.
Yeah, I think they call the land up there terra firma or something like that. It's the opposite of that. It's I've heard a couple guys' stories of near-death experience with that. Even years ago when I was, probably in my 20s or something, I heard Chuck Adams speak about that. He was talking about some adventures where he almost lost his life and chasing the super slam and everything. And he had kind of one of those near-death experiences in a circumstance like that really caught my attention before I ever got to go up to places like that. And it's always stuck with me to really be vigilant of what you're looking for.
And you're right, that tundra or that muskeg, that stuff, you said 1 mile equals 3, and like you say, I don't even know if that's accurate. Like, it is so tough to walk through, and you hear that it's tough to walk through, and you read that it's tough to walk through, but it's just different when you actually get up there and start stepping across it, and it's all these soft mounds that come up, and then all around the soft mounds are this lowland, water, boggy country, and so you don't know whether to step in the middle in the bog or to step on the high spots, and it doesn't seem like either way works very well. Like you'll try one way for a little bit, and then that doesn't work, and then you'll start stepping in the low spots, and it's just really ankle-twisting, moving country, and it's really soft, and so your feet sink in at every step. And also, it's trying to roll yourself over. It's trying to roll your ankles with every step, roll it one way or another. I did find that trekking poles really helped in that country, but it just takes such an exertion level from your legs, like trying to balance on that stuff and walk across it, that, yeah, you do 1 mile and it feels like you've walked 5. Like, that stuff is so tough to move through.
Yeah, not only that, you mentioned how it's kind of not more than kind of, it's really uneven ground, and it's funny to hear you say that mindset where should I stay on top of these muskegs or should I walk in between them? And I think everybody that's ever walked through stuff like that, you do this balancing act of, oh, it's got to be easier the other way. No, it's got to be easier the other way, because it's just a pain in the butt to do. And when we had our rafts, one of the rafts in particular was pretty heavy, and when we were toting that across the tundra, it was all I could do a couple times not to twist my knee. I mean, you could start off a trip really bad by twisting a knee or an ankle if you're not careful hiking across that stuff. And you're right, trekking poles were a godsend on that. We used those to transport our stuff across that, and then also to pack the bull that Casey shot with his rifle down off the hillside. That was just a tundra hillside. I mean, you would think, water flows downhill. There can't be any more water up on top. And no, I mean, everywhere that you step or kneel or sit or anything is wet. And compared to the high desert that we live here in northern Wyoming, I had never, by the end of the trip, even though I had a blast, I had never longed for a dry, dusty antelope hunt in August when it's 100 degrees so much in my life. I never thought I'd dream of bow hunting antelope in August when it's just hot and miserable. But I was so tired of being wet by the end of the trip. It's like, okay, I'd kill for an antelope hunt right now. I was just so, I mean, you're like a prune by the end of the trip.
Well, yeah, and just dry ground you can walk across and cover country. Like, you see those moose, and it looks like you can get to them, and pretty soon, a half a day later, you're not even to the spot where you saw the moose. It's such a it blows your mind up there how tough it is to traverse that country, and so you got to keep that in mind too. And so hunting those river bottoms is a good way to go, and it seems like those moose really like those timber patches in that river bottom and like to move along that river corridor. But for some reason, it doesn't seem to, for moose and caribou to move across that tundra, it doesn't seem like it makes it any tougher on them. Like, they're just used to it. They're four-wheel drive, and they just motor through that stuff. It doesn't slow them down a bit.
No, you can tell that they're used to cruising that. But I could tell, though, on the trip that the moose definitely don't move quite as easily as the caribou do across that. I mean, I think that's why they gravitate towards those river corridors where they're a little more easier for them to traverse. I mean, they still move way easier than we do across the tundra and everything. But it was kind of funny. We came across a tight bend in a river, and we saw a couple cow moose right there, and we scared them because you're moving pretty silently through the water, and the water's raging anyway. And we came across or around this corner, and boom, 2 cow moose right there in our face, and we scared them. And it was funny watching them trying to run fast across the tundra, because they did struggle with that a little bit. They were stumbling a little bit. It was pretty comical to watch.
Okay. Kind of nice to see them have the same challenges we do.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And like I said, reiterated that why they probably stick closer to the river itself. They can move a little bit easier.
What did you find was the best for footwear in that muskeg or that tundra?
We practically lived in our waders and our wading boots. We didn't wear, I don't know if this is smart or not, but we didn't wear waders that had the boots attached. Now, I will say this. We were just at SHOT Show, and we saw the new waterfowl waders that Sitka came out with, and I would have loved to have tried those on a float hunt like that. I think that would have been pretty interesting to try them out. But either way, I didn't have those. I had a very lightweight pair of fly fishing waders that I had bought at Sports' Warehouse a couple of years ago, some of their Rustic Ridge pairs, and then some Sims wading boots. And you pretty much live in them. I mean, you wear them until you go to bed at night, and you get up in the morning and you put on your waders and wet boots. And some nights they were or some mornings they were frozen. In fact, we took some video footage with our phones where it showed us cracking the frost off of our waders and our boots in the morning before we got into them. And I think on our trip we were using a Seek Outside shelter, and it was their Red Cliff, the bigger one. And we had one of the stoves in there too, and that was just a lifesaver because you could at least take the chill off. It still wasn't pleasant, but you could take the chill off before you got started for the day and feel like you're not starting from frozen anyway. But that's what we found to be the best. And we'd usually have a pair of camp shoes, either half worn out tennis shoes or hiking shoes or something to wear around camp. I did have a pair of, what brand were they? I think they were a pair of muck boots that weren't the traditional muck boot. They were more of a lace-up, super lightweight type of a muck boot that I packed with. And they were great as far as long as the water wasn't, above my shins. And they were comfortable to wear. And I used them around Casey's Caribou and around camp that time. But the problem is they don't breathe. And I was sweating pretty good because the temperature was a little bit warmer that day. When I say warmer, it was like the highest day I think was 50. But in this day it was probably 45 or something, so it's not like it was hot. But I was plenty warm processing the caribou and everything, which is a whole other story in and of itself, because Casey had jumped in the river to stop our raft so we could get to the shore to recover his caribou. He was neck deep in water, everything. I mean, he had water billowing over his waders, and it was one of those near-death experiences that it was the smartest and the dumbest thing he could have done on that trip. It was a superhuman feat that he jumped out and grabbed a tree limb and still had a hold of the raft and literally butterflied the raft and the tree limb together. I jumped out, got on the shore, and because there wasn't a gravel bar there, it was just a bank, I should say, got up on the river bank, and then we pulled the raft up so we could get to his caribou, because otherwise we were going to be miles downstream and not knowing how we could get back to this caribou. We assumed coming around the corner there was going to be another gravel bar that we could pull off on, and we were wrong. And we got around the corner and the water was raging, and it was probably the most serious rapids that we faced along the trip. And to be honest, we're not experienced. I mean, we'd been in river rafts before and whitewater rafted a little bit, but nothing crazy or extreme. And this was getting to be a little bit outside of our comfort zone, and because of the moisture that we'd had. And anyway, we get up on the shore and we start doing that rewarming drill actually with him after we had done some video wrap-up footage and taken pictures of him and his caribou, and then I proceeded to cut up the caribou while he went down to the tent. We got him started doing the rewarming drill like we did with John Barclow at Sitka, and perform that survival exercise on him because he was soaking wet. And when you're in that wet climate with not very high temperatures, your stuff's not going to dry out. I mean, your clothes, if you take your clothes off, think they're going to air dry or build a fire, good luck. It's going to take a long time or it's not going to happen, and you're going to have some serious concerns with safety and hypothermia and stuff. And so as soon as I made sure that he had his wits about him and was okay mentally to take care of himself, I went up on the hill and cut up his caribou, which is about 300 yards off the river. And anyway, so what I did is wore those lace-up muck boots up there, so I didn't have to wear my waders all the way up top. And I had sweat so much when I was doing that and trying to be efficient and get this done before we got too far into the dark. They never dried out the rest of the trip. And so hindsight, I don't know that I would ever wear a pair of boots like that on that trip again, because they were wet and stinky and nasty. That was day 2 of the float, and we still had 8 more days, actually 9 until our pickup. And it wasn't ideal. So what I would generally stick with is a pair of wading boots, lightweight pair of waders, and then have the waders big enough so you can insulate yourself, layer up underneath them if you have to, and then pretty much rely on the wading boots for most of it, and then a pair of camp shoes. That's what I found anyway. Did you? I don't know. I can't remember what you took up there.
Yeah, so same way I use those breathable waders quite a bit, but I just found like the hikes I was making, and I do find that the hiking boots, like you had the boots that go on, and the boot fit waders, like as far as I do a ton of fishing for steelhead and trout and things, and the boot foot waders with the boots built into them are really good for the on and off, and they're really good in a boat. But as far as hiking and hiking miles, like they're not
Yeah.
so good because they can slip around and you can get sores from them. Where the other lightweight, I think I've got some Patagonia wading boots, some real lightweight ones, with my lightweight breathable waders. I use that system, but I would get so hot trying to hike a mile or two in those things that I'd start sweating even in those breathable waders, and it was just real uncomfortable and tough to hike around. Now, that was definitely the system we used for in the rafts at all times and moving down the river systems and then hunting close to the river systems. But then when I'd hunt away from camp or I'd make a hike at night, I liked like a waterproof, lightweight pair of boots, but you had to be really careful that you didn't go over the top with water. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I was thinking the system was a pair of muck boots, but you just proved me wrong on that you had those there and they got wet from hiking in them. So I don't know. I think those breathable waders with a good pair of hiking shoes for around the river, and then I think a good like a high waterproof lightweight hiking boot I think would be my next choice for out there for trying to keep your feet dry but then being comfortable to hike around. But it's tough. It doesn't seem like there's a perfect fit for what you got to experience there.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, what I would do is do what I did the previous year up in, when Dan Picard and I went to British Columbia and we were hunting moose more from a cabin type site and going across lakes on boats and hiking and things like that. What I would do, we hiked quite a bit on that hunt. I had muck type boots with me on that hunt, and then I also had I think I had Kenetrek pack boots, and then somebody else had Schnees, and of course they're real similar products. And I would have something like that if I would do a float hunt again. I would do, because I got to test them both in British Columbia, which is really wet too. And so days we were walking with water going up over top of our boots and going on longer hikes. The nice thing about those pack boots from either Schnees or Kenetrek is or even Whites or any of those companies, you can lace them up and have them fit around your foot and your lower part of your leg a little bit better. And so you can hike in them all day long. I mean, they're a little heavy and stuff compared to a lightweight hiker, but they're comfortable and you're not going to get blisters, because I did go on a pretty long hike in British Columbia with a pair of loose fitting muck boots on, and I paid for it for the rest of the trip. It really not injured, but stressed my Achilles tendon on one of my feet, and I kind of limped for the rest of the trip, so that was not a good time. And the nice thing about the pack boots, like you see from Kenetrek and Schnees, is they have that wool liner on the inside, so even if you get water that goes over the top of your boots, or they end up leaking or something from a puncture from the type of terrain that's out there, your feet are still going to stay warm and feel somewhat dry, because that wool is going to wick that moisture away. And at night, you can dry that wool out over your stove and your tent if you have it like we did. That's what I would do. Hindsight, I'd have my waders, my wading boots, a lightweight pair of camp shoes, and then a pair of pack boots, I think, is the best system.
I think you're right. A higher lace up, and then have some gaiters so the grass doesn't get them wet, your pant legs there to where they start soaking into those boots. But I think you're right. I think that's the best combo a guy could have for there. But you got to have those breathable waders for going down that river, and you got to be on your game when you're going down that river. You're so far away from civilization and so far away from help that you really are all on your own there, and the decisions you make determine your outcome, in the hunt, and also determine your safety on a hunt like that. And those river systems, the ground is so soft. It seems like there's so many overhanging trees in the river, which are real dangers when you're floating down a river. And so you really have to be cognizant of it all the time to make sure that you're prepared for anything that you run into. And whether it's rapids or what we would run into is sometimes you'd come around a tight corner and it'd shove you right into a bank or into a sweeping tree in there, which is really dangerous. And so having those waders on, you're able to get to the bank and pull off and then kind of walk your boat around some of those spots. But you have to have those breathable waders for that, for navigating that river.
Yeah, because it's a full body workout the whole time you're doing that, especially if the river's moving fast. Like I said, this year, or 2017, when we went, they had gotten a lot of moisture, the weeks, months leading up to when we went. And now I will say this, even though it was a little bit more of an adrenaline rush than what I'd bargained for a couple of stretches of that river, or of the two rivers that we were on. Actually, three rivers that we were on because of the couple of different confluences. I would rather have it that way than the river system that I was on, and maybe yours is the same way. It's feast or famine. And so if you don't get a lot of that moisture beforehand, you're going to be dragging a lot. And so that's one of the terms that Larry Bartlett has coined years ago, called float, drag in Alaska, because you're half the time you're floating and half the time you're dragging. And luckily, we didn't have that problem. We didn't have to drag a bunch. We did just a real minor bit over some riffles that we didn't navigate properly when we were coming up to them. So we got a little hung up on some rocks, but nothing big. And but the guys the year before, they drug for, I think, 2 days. Oh. And that does not sound like a good time to me at all. And so it's really feast or famine. If they don't get the moisture, you're going to be dragging those rafts, and especially after you get critters down, of course, the rafts weigh a lot more, and it just gets to be harder and harder to do that, harder and harder to drag. And plus, you're tired, you're not sleeping very well, and just exerting yourself. That rowing in those high flow river systems, I mean, it was like you were on a full body workout machine for 8 hours a day. And by the time we got out of there, not only do you lose a lot of weight like you do on any backcountry hunt, for the first time since I think I was in college, I actually had a 6-pack. I'm like, holy cow, I should do this once a month, come up here and do a float hunt. I felt like a beast, I felt like I was in really good shape, best shape I've been in a while. But it's just because you are getting a full body workout every single day on those hunts. And it's just a real butt kicker. That's why you have to have a system down on your nutrition management and your hydration, because if you negate any of those, any one of the days on a trip like that, you can be in some serious trouble.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and another thing that affects water flow is as it starts freezing up high, it starts releasing less and less water, and so the rivers get smaller and smaller. And so the system that we were on started off small, and then as it started to hit confluences with other rivers and streams that came in, it got to be a bigger river. But at the start of it, it was some dragging involved, and that's what our pilot warned us about. Is he said, don't stay up high too long, because if it gets cold or starts freezing at night and freezing during the day, it's not melting up high, and all of a sudden that river will start to shrink up, and then you can't get a boat down. You're going to end up dragging the entire thing. And so we had to remember that on our hunt as well. And that dragging those rafts is takes such exertion out of you, and it is a total body workout doing it. And then the rowing part, we had like an upriver wind every day, and so we couldn't even just really float down and enjoy the float. We had to forward or turn the boat around backwards oar to make our way against the wind that was pushing up the stream. And so I felt the same way when I got done with the float hunt. I was in extremely good shape from that entire body workout the whole time.
Yeah, I can believe that. I hadn't thought of that. We didn't run into too many south winds when we were floating down. We were mostly concerned about the sweepers in the face of the really fast river character that we'd experienced. So I didn't really have to row against the wind too much. I think we might have had one day where there's a little bit of a breeze from the south, but it wasn't anything that we had to fight. Yeah, that's a whole nother obstacle. I mean, there's just a lot of things to consider when you're on a trip like that you really can't foresee until you've done it. Or you hopefully hear a podcast like this and it helps you, or read an article in a magazine or watch a video or whatever. and all those little things. It's hard to remember all of these things until you're up there, and you're on a trip and you think, oh man, I should have prepared for this or that or whatever. There's just a lot of variables.
Well, and how tough is it on you day in, day out of picking up your camp and then loading it all into the raft and then rafting down and setting up your camp? By the end of the trip, you are so tired of picking up and resetting up your camp. You just almost want to be done with it, but that's a major part to that hunt as well.
Oh, definitely. It's funny. I was laughing when you said that because after you're doing it for a couple of days, you kind of get a good division of labor going with your buddy that you just form a system and he's going to take care of that while you're taking care of this. And Casey shot his caribou on day 2, so we had meat care to deal with at least twice a day, if not midday monitoring of the meat, depending on the temperatures and everything and the moisture levels as we're floating down. But so our system was we'd find a good gravel bar we wanted to camp and call from in the evening, and we would dock there and we'd anchor the rafts, and he'd start on the meat cache and I'd start putting the tent up and getting the cots up because we were using those ultralight cots from Helinox and also Thermarest, and we're testing those out on the trip, which was kind of interesting. And I had set up that tent and taken that tent down, and it's an easy tent to do. I mean, it's a floorless, lightweight shelter. It takes really just a few minutes to put up. But I told Casey on the last day, I said, if I have to set up that tent one more time, I'm going to rage, because I was so sick and tired of putting that tent up and taking it down and dealing with the stove and dealing with the ashes and burying those and making sure nobody could tell where we were camped. And he's dealing with the meat cache and loading his raft with that. And I was getting the camping gear on mine. And man, it was just like we were a factory. And you wouldn't think, listening to this hindsight, it sounds like, oh, poor me, I'm on this Alaska float hunt and I have to set up a tent every day, big deal. But it's just such a mental drag that you're doing this stuff, you're tired, you've lost energy levels, even though you're really trying to keep your nutrition level up. You're just tired and you're whipped out, and you've dealt with meat care and everything for all these days and near-death experiences, and it's an emotional roller coaster up and down. And one minute you're tickled pink that you're up there, next minute you think you're crazy for leaving your family to go on an adventure like that. And so by the time you're done, you're just like, you're kind of mentally done. You just need a break for a while. And that's setting up the campsite every day, setting it up every day and tearing it down every day. You're right, man. I'm right there with you. It's like, if I have to do this one more time, I'm going to freak out.
Well, we did have that scenario. Like you say, you get a really good system with your buddies and everybody chips in and it goes pretty quick. And it's, it's also packing the raft every day and unpacking the raft every day. And then we got to the end of our trip and we were 100 miles away from where we were flying into. We flew out of the Coldfoot there, the airport there in Coldfoot. And so we'd have to pack all our stuff up, get ready for the float plane. And then we'd get a spot messenger, it's Delorme now, messenger that our pilot couldn't make it due to weather there, couldn't take off. And so then it dang near drove us crazy. We'd have our tent, all our stuff packed up, sitting on the gravel bar, and then we'd have to set up our tent again and then do it the next day. And we actually had to stay 2 extra days while moose season was closed just because he couldn't fly out. But you're right, at the end of it, I was like, if I have to set up this tent one more time, I'm going to snap.
Yeah, I hear you, and it's interesting. I didn't know that you had to stay 2 extra days. That you hear that story a lot. We were fortunate where we got picked up when we were supposed to be, but I know one gentleman in particular. This is a pretty extreme example, but just to give everybody an idea of just how much longer you could be out there than what you planned for. He was out there for 11 extra days because of weather, and the pilots just either couldn't leave or couldn't get to him because of the weather system that had moved in. And he said he did a lot of fishing, and thank goodness he had a fishing rod with him and everything. But yeah, you just never know. There's a lot of variables on these types of trips. And I've touched a little bit, a couple times on the nutrition side of it. And I'm not a nutritionist, and I'm not going to pretend to be. But we got to participate in a wilderness health study that was done by a gentleman at the University of Fairbanks that is friends with Bartlett, and we got to. It was a very limited sample set that they had, but a really neat study that we got to be a part of. So the day before that we left on the float, we got to go up to the University of Fairbanks and meet their team up there, and we had some serious in-depth health analysis done on our bodies with an MRI that we got, a DEXA scan, so body fat percentages and everything, and then also riding an exercise bike with this giant, well, felt giant was on your head, this oxygen sensing apparatus that had a computer output reading go into this computer system they had, and they would exert you at different levels on this bike, and every 2 minutes it would kick up to another exertion level, and until your breathing level was getting to where you just couldn't keep up, and then they'd shut the machine down, and then they monitor that, and we'd weigh in and everything. And then once we got out of the float, we had to do the same thing to see how your body changed over that 10 to 13 day period. And then also every single morning while we were on the float, we had vials that we had to take urine samples in. And then they monitored and tested all that. In fact, they're doing that right now and compiling their results. So it's February as we do this podcast. That was in September. So it takes quite a while to go through all those results. But we're going to plan, hopefully, an article in a magazine or an update on the TV show or something with that whole trip and in that wilderness study, because I don't think anything like that's been done that intense with hunters. It's been done with athletes a lot, of course, but not with a hunting crowd in that official of a format. And I was honored to be a part of it. They called and asked if we wanted to participate. I'm like, absolutely. And I'm a biologist by trade, and so some of that stuff really interests me anyway. And so is Casey. So we participated in that. And the joke of the trip was, I told them that the title of the TV show or the article that we may do in the journals is "You're in Alaska," because of all the urine samples we had to take every day. I'm like, I did not think part of my pack list was going to be urine samples. I'll be honest with you.
Oh, how interesting, though. Man, you have to share those results with me when you get them back. That is really cool.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. And there's little things about your body, like your fingernails. I noticed just even a couple weeks ago. Well, I was more than that, probably a month ago. We were at the supper table at our house, and I looked down at my fingernails, and I hadn't noticed it before. There was this ridge at the same level of all of 10 of my fingernails. And I looked, my wife's a nurse, and I said, "Have you ever seen anything like that before? I've never noticed that on my fingernails." And she said it probably is coinciding with your trip to Alaska, because your body was under extreme duress, similar to growth rings on a tree, that the rings were tighter, so to speak. And so I had this funky looking ridge on all, and they're almost done growing out now, but you can still see it. And the reason why we could tell that it was probably from the Alaska trip was because when we were pounding in 10 stakes on those gravel bars, I smashed 2 of my fingers a couple times in a row while pounding them in with another rock. And it was exactly at that level on all 10 of my fingers where that ridge was. And that even surprised the PhD professor up at University of Fairbanks. He was pretty shocked to hear that. So I recently sent him photos of all of my fingernails so he could see those results and tie them into the study.
Oh, wow. How interesting.
Yeah,
it's such a neat experience, though. I came away from it. I didn't kill a moose up there as well, but it was just like that one experience that I had to do once in my life, and I want to go back. I'm saving my pennies so I can do another one, because I'd love to kill an Alaskan Yukon moose. But it was, you kind of have to adapt to the terrain and adapt to the conditions you're getting to hunt that place. And so, hunting there, I love finding vantage points, and I love glassing over vast terrains. And where I started up high on the system, it was more open, and so I was able to get to these glassing points, and I was able to find moose that way by getting to these high points where I could look over immense amounts of country. And then we would also mix that up by doing calling sessions in big flats where we would see a lot of moose sign. They like the big timber flats, and so we do calling sequences. But I think it's important as you're floating the river that you stop I'd stop as much as I could. I'd pull that raft over, and just climbing up the bank, you can see so much more than you can when you're down in the river. And so I think that's really important for guys that you have spots that you want to hunt from and places where you want to camp. You can kind of look on a map and plan it out a little bit, but make sure you're stopping along the way and climbing that high bank and looking to see what's around you.
Yeah, definitely. Because if you don't, you're going to miss a lot of game. You're going to miss a lot of opportunity. I mean, that close encounter that we had with that bull that was just sublegal. One night we had our camp set up. And I think we stopped at around 5 o'clock or something. Got our camp set up, and then we went out hunting for the duration of the evening there. And And the other thing with moose hunting that I didn't know really until I went to British Columbia last year and hunted with Dan Brooks is that you have to be so patient. They are some of the most patient animals from the big game side of things, I think, on the planet. Their their hearing is just phenomenal, and they're so used to low densities of their own species that they will wait and wait and wait and wait until they know for sure what they're looking at, what they're hearing, and then they'll come in. We called for between an hour and a half and 2 hours on that gravel bar. It was a great big gravel bar. We had our tent at one end and we went to the other end and we're calling, and the habitat looked really, really moosey. And we called and about ready to hang it up, going, oh, well, it's kind of the evening, I guess. We'll go back to the tent and cook supper and all that stuff. And right about the time we were going to quit, we looked across the river, and we were at a shallow part of the river where there was a pretty easy crossing to walk across. We saw a moose paddle. And he was probably 80 yards away at the time. And from the side, we thought he was legal. He looked pretty nice. And then when he looked straight on, we could see he didn't have 4 brow tines on either side. And he was probably that upper 40s for spread. And we're like, oh, man, he's right there. And since we thought we'd use it as an educational opportunity. And my buddy Casey wasn't really excited about that, because obviously when moose are in the rut, they can be really dangerous. And I had my recurve with, and I said, oh, I'm going to mess with this bull and we're going to learn a thing or two. And he goes, man, I don't think that's a good idea. If you get this thing all riled up and he doesn't leave, we can't shoot him because he's not legal. So what are we going to do? I'm like, no, it'll be fine. And so I looked at him and I gave a big old cow call. And the river was really loud, so it was still kind of hard to hear. And I got his attention. And so he pinpointed where we were at, and I stepped out from the willows that we were standing in, and I started doing the swaying back and forth, and I started grunting at him. And we did this parallel of each other for I don't know how long, up and down this river bank, across the river from each other. And he would rake brush, and then I'd rake brush, and he'd call back and I'd call back. And we kept doing this. And it was just honestly the experience of a lifetime. And even though he wasn't a legal bull, but it gave me the confidence because he wasn't legal. I wasn't really worried about screwing it up. And so I learned a ton in just this hour that we played around with this bull. And then he finally got so worked up that he came across the river at us, and I put my recurve down and I waved my arms up in the air and I yelled at him saying, get out of here. The fun's over. Get out of here. Clap my hands. And usually they'll snap out of it. And he did not snap out of it. He kept coming and grunting, coming across the river. And by this time, he's probably, 40 yards from us. And Casey's yelling at me because he's not real happy with me now because this moose is coming onto this island that we're camped on, that we can't just run away from this thing. And he's just rut crazed. He's rutted up and he's ready to dance, and I quit grunting, but he's still grunting, coming across the river at us, going, whoa, whoa, whoa. Just kept doing it, swaying his head at me, and he was really mad at me, and I had a pistol with for bear defense, and I got the pistol out and I just shot it to try to scare him away, and the noise scared him. He spun around in circles, did a 360, and looked around like, what was that noise? And then he sees me again, puts his head down, whoa, 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 just kept coming. And I had to do that twice. He still wasn't going to leave. We went running back through the willows on this island trying to figure out what we're going to do to get him out of there. And as we're figuring out a plan, here comes his paddles through these willow trees. He's 12 yards away. And he stops looking for us because he doesn't know where we went. And I told Casey, I said, I don't know if this is going to work, but you run out on that side of the cover, I'll run on this side of the cover. We'll yell and act like crazy people and wave our arms in the air, run at him, just kind of rush him, and hopefully he'll leave. If he doesn't, I don't know what we're going to do. And he finally, when he saw us do that, he kind of reared up like a horse and thought, yeah, I'm out of here. It's enough. But still, he went back across the river, walked down the river channel, so he was directly across from our tent, which there wasn't a crossing. It was a pretty deep channel right there. And he grunted at us for probably another 30 minutes. And to me, that was worth a trip right there. Casey, my friend, is pretty funny. He said, the thing that was freaking me out, if he thought you were the bull, he thought I was the cow. And he said, what was he coming to do? It was funny.
Oh, what a cool experience. So that's a run-it-up bull that you want to find. He just has to be a few inches bigger.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a super neat experience, but guys that live up there probably get to do that all the time, but guys like us that don't, you don't get to see that very often. And we took advantage of it and then got to experience that. And I'm glad it worked out that nobody got hurt out of the deal. But it was sure a learning experience to see what they would do in that circumstance.
Yeah, how cool. Well, and you made a good point, like you're talking about how patient they are, and they don't come in like an elk comes in. They don't come in right away. Like, they can come in hours later. Like, you can make a call, and we had one bull that was a shooter bull, and we were hunting the afternoon, evening. We had found a really good flat that had a ton of moose sign in it. You just knew moose were in there. There was fresh tracks. We had a skiff of snow. There was fresh tracks, fresh scat. And so I would go in this flat, get my wind right, and I'd start calling in the afternoon and then in the evening. And my last call set was right above camp, and we sat there until the sun started to set and then walked back to camp. And so we're sitting around the fire at camp there and talking, and all of a sudden I can hear it. I can hear a bull grunt. I said, "Hey, guys, be quiet for a second. I hear a bull." And this bull had come in like 2 hours later, and it came on the opposite side of the river and then crossed this giant river that's pretty deep and then walked right through our camp, grunting the whole time. And we're hiding, down by the fire, trying to hide the fire in the tent and not make any noise. So hopefully we can hunt that bull in the morning. But I could see him, there was a full moon or a partially full moon, and so I could see with my binos as he was crossing the river, and he was just a gigantic bull that came across there. We never did catch up with him the next day, but it just to your point, like calling, like you have to call and make a set, and that moose may come in hours later, not minutes later.
Yeah, and we're so cautious in the lower 48 of where we set our camps up as far as the animals seeing us, and if they saw the tent, they're out of there or whatever. That's not the case up north. They don't see a lot of that, and if that's where they want to be. In fact, we had one decent sized bull in the middle of the night walk 10 yards from our tent at about, I think it was 3 a.m, and we got woken up by this grunt. Well, first of all, we heard something splashing in the water, and at first we thought something was getting into our rafts. And we tried to make sure the blood was off of Casey's raft, if there was any on there at all from his animal, and so that a bear wouldn't get into it or whatever. But initially, Casey woke up and he thought that something was dragging our rafts off because it was so loud. Well, it turns out it was just a big old bull that was walking across the river, walks right between our rafts and our tent, 10 yards from our tent at 3 a.m. And so it doesn't matter if you're, even with caribou, if you're where they want to be, they're going to come there. It's just the way it is. And so, being concerned about your tent setup seems like the longer that we were on that trip and the more we learned that was really not much of a concern. I mean, if they were at the point where they wanted to come, they're going to come either way. And there's not a lot you can do to really spook them.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, hunting around your camp can definitely be effective, as you are just right in the travel corridor of those moose in there, and yeah, those things they're really fun to hunt. They're just gosh, they even though their numbers are condensed, like their numbers per square mile, like we talked earlier, there's just not a lot of them around. So you can go a day or two without seeing a moose very easily, So you got to really read the sign of the river and try to find the spots they like to hang out, and then focus on those spots, which can be tough because when you're on a river float, you have a deadline to be picked up, and so I think it's always good to have like a few extra days in your trip where you know you don't have to be on the river day in, day out, that if you find a good location or a good area, that you can stay and hunt it for a day or two and maybe get into those animals a little bit more.
Yep, I agree. I think, patience is the key, like we already said with moose hunting. And if you can spend a day or two really hard hunting one particular real moosey looking spot, I think 9 times out of 10 you're going to be successful. It's just the name of the game is patience. And, they're solitary animals by nature. And, we did a bunch of tips and stuff with Dan Brooks, Crystal Lake Resort up in British Columbia when we were up there a couple of years ago, and we put him on our YouTube channel. He's just an encyclopedia of moose knowledge. And one of the things that he really preaches to all of his hunters is they're solitary animals. And so by nature, they're skeptical when they hear another moose, because most of the time there's not supposed to be another moose around. That's their home territory. And they're not gregarious at all. And so when they're coming into a call or your horn brushing or whatever, they're naturally skeptical unless they're just absolute peak of the rut. Then they're going to come in no matter what. But your movements are so key during that time, because if they pick up, their eyesight isn't the best, but if they pick up on movement, they will stand there sometimes for 30 minutes, piercing a hole right through you and not moving. And so you can't move either. Because if you do, the jig is up and they're going to leave.
Oh, yeah, really interesting. That had to be fun to pick Dan Brooks's brain on hunting moose, since he's just spent a lifetime of hunting them in close encounters up there. He really knows the species as good as anybody else, in Canada or Alaska. That had to be really interesting and great insight for you.
Yeah, I mean, because when you think about it, since there's not a lot of people that can hunt moose, not only because of the cost, but also there's just not a lot of animals, compared to deer or elk or antelope or anything else. So opportunities are limited. And so there's very few people really in this world that are experts on moose, because they just haven't had that experience around them. And Dan Brooks has been, he's in his early 40s, I think. And he's been guiding moose hunters since he was 14 years old, I think, was what I heard. And he's just, the guy has forgotten more about moose than what most people ever know. It was really an educational experience, which was really nice to do a hunt like that before I went up to Alaska and did a DIY adventure, because, you're investing that kind of time and money. You want to make sure that you at least kind of know what you're doing before you go up there. And that's another thing I was going to ask you, Brian. You did this DIY adventure like I did. Were you shocked at the total end dollar figure that you spent on this quote-unquote affordable hunt?
Yes. I was. It all just adds up. You kind of have a rough number in your head that you're planning on. You think, well, that's not too bad. I can budget for that. I can do that. But there's just so much added cost with the, you start getting into the float plane back and forth, and there's a couple ways to go about it. I think you did it where you paid for your animals up front. So if you shot animals, it was going to be the same price as if you didn't. I did mine the other way, where I paid for my float trip in, but if I killed a moose, it was going to get expensive to fly it out of there. And so, yeah, you just start adding up all that, and then your commercial flights up there, float plane, by the time you get your rafts, by the time you get your food, it just all starts to add up. And I added it up in the end, and it was about double what I figured that I wanted to spend up there when I first committed to the hunt. And so, yeah, guys really got to be careful as the cost climbs really quick. And I think I did... and I'm just shooting from the hip trying to remember. I think I did my trip for around 5,000 or 6,000 per guy, and we went to this really remote spot in Alaska. We wanted to have a chance at the biggest Alaskan Yukon moose that you could get. So we were kind of the farthest spot that you could fly to and float a river. And the biologist told us there were some really good bulls that frequent in there, that you're going to see some of the 60s and 70s, which we did. But yeah, I think I was around the $5,000-6,000 mark, and I think if I would have killed a bull moose, I had to get another plane in there to get that out. I think I would have been more in around the $8,000 to $9,000 mark, and that's for a do-it-yourself hunt. So yeah, it added up really quick for me as well.
Yeah, those dollar figures completely mirror what our hunt was. We did the fixed rate bush flights, so that way if we did get something, we weren't going to be, penalized with the weights and everything. But, the downside is if you don't get a whole lot, like we only got the one caribou, which really isn't a ton of weight. They made a lot of money off of us because it didn't cost that much. But, it's just a gamble you take. But I was budgeting on the low end, 4,000, on the high end, 6,000, thinking, and I've been saving up for this for quite a while and do this do-it-yourself adventure to save all kinds of money. And I was adding up all of my receipts. I mean, down to the last grocery bill and rental car and whatever else I had to get when I was up there. And it was between 8,000 and 9,000. I think it was right around $8,500. I was adding up the receipts on the way back on our plane rides and stuff. And yeah, I hadn't really added anything up for a while because it's like a 2 to 3 year process of planning this and booking things. It's $500 here and a couple $100 there and $50 there, and pretty soon you're several $1,000s into this, and it's still a great adventure and it's worth doing. But just so everybody knows, affordable is a relative term. I mean, you're still talking about $8,000. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Oh, it's so much money.
Especially for a guy like me. I'm just a normal dude that makes a normal living, and I'm not raking in the cashola. And so it was I was a little bit, I don't know what the word is, maybe a little bit upset with myself for not watching it closer. Not that I could have saved any more because we were pretty frugal with everything we did, but I was just astounded at what the total bill was. It was about $2,000 to $3,000 more than what I'd budgeted. That was a tough pill to swallow. I'm thankful I have an understanding wife, I will say that.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I'm just an average blue-collar guy, and to spend that kind of money, it hurts. Like, you have to work so hard for that money, and it was well worth every penny I spent, and I'm glad I did the adventure. That experience is a once-in-a-lifetime for me. So it was so fun to do, but I had the same feelings when I added it up in the end and found out what I spent. Like, it's hard for me to swallow that pill of that much money to go on a hunt like that. So yeah, guys do want to be prepared to do it, but you're going to be 2.5, or even 3 times to do that on a guided trip. And do it yourself is to plan everything and to get all your stuff yourself is, to me, makes for, I like that experience more. I like to be in charge of things and in charge of the planning. And so for me, the do-it-yourself was the only option. But, it does get up there. It is not inexpensive to hunt Alaska anymore. And actually, the tag price doubled on you last year. Did you get in on the cheaper prices buying it before January 1st, or did you have to pay the new tag prices?
I was able to get in the old license price structure by about a week is what I made it by. I just found out on a fluke thing at the last minute. Actually, I think it was Bartlett had texted me, said, make sure that you buy your tags in time or else the fees are going to double. And the agency was good to work with as far as letting you buy it a year in advance under the current prices before they went up. But yeah, when I heard that they were going to double, I thought, well, that's an expression. They're going to go up. I doubt they're going to double. No, they literally doubled everything.
They doubled.
And, yep. And so now let's just say if I would go and do that trip again, the same trip would cost me probably another $2,000.
Yes. Yep, that's the same thing I found too. And then, caribou prices doubled, and moose prices doubled, and all of their big game really. And so, yeah, it's tough. A guy's really got a budget for it and decide that's what he wants to do. But I do think float hunting is one of the best ways to hunt Alaska. You can also do the drop camps. Some of the super cubs can really get in on some small runways where there isn't much pressure. But they've got to plant you right in that moose spot, and that's tough to guarantee that you're not going to be there and see a handful of cows and not see a bull. I've heard of that before. And you can do. There is some driving things you can do in Alaska, but there's not many roadways, and a lot of the trails up there, you can use ATVs and UTVs on them, but at the same time, that's what all the locals can do. So all the locals from Fairbanks and Anchorage are using all those same river systems, so you end up hunting in a lot of pressure. There's not as big of bulls, it's not the same experience. So I mean, I do think the float trip is a great way to see Alaska and a great way to experience that wild and vast remote country and have an adventure of a lifetime up there. But yeah, you definitely got a budget, and with tag prices going up and the cost of avgas, it's definitely not a cheap hunt.
No, it's not. And it's one of those things that you have to balance with what your priorities are in life. If that's something that you want to save up for years and write that check for, or not. I mean, I heard a really wise person tell me a number of years ago. In fact, he's a guy that does do-it-yourself Alaska hunting seminars. At least he used to. I don't know if he still does. He'd been guiding in Alaska for or at least flying in Alaska for 20 or 30 years, and he was just an immense resource. He's a gentleman that's from North Dakota. I think his name is Mark Hamilton or Mark Hamill. But anyway, he said that life is, and this, we weren't even talking about hunting at the time. We were just talking about life in general. And, life is made up of the experiences that you live. And I know that sounds pretty simple, but you think about it, and yeah, you can be super cautious in life, and you can pinch your pennies, and you can, live a pretty conservative lifestyle, which isn't a bad thing. But sometimes you just got to step out there and you got to do some exciting things. And what's exciting to you might not be exciting to somebody else, but whatever trips your trigger, as long as it's legal and ethical and moral, sometimes you just got to take a chance. You got to see what you're made of. And that's what I tell my kids. I've got 4 little kids, and when I come back from even, backpacking hunts that push you to the limits physically and mentally, and you get done, 7 days in the backcountry or whatever, and you get back home and you've lost 10 to 15 pounds and you're just wore out. And sometimes they look at you kind of weird, like, why are you doing this to yourself? And I tell the kids, part of the reason why I do it is you got to, I don't know if test yourself is the right word, but it always shows you what you're made of. And for me, I need that personally. I need that constant, a little bit of a test, a little bit of a push, so I don't get lazy. And because for me, when I get lazy, then I get careless, I get soft, I get unintentional with life. And I know you and I both love that word intentional, whether it's being a father or husband, an employee, an employer, a hunter, whatever you're doing, do it as hard as you can, as best as you can. And so that way, to use a sports analogy, you leave it all in the field, and you have no regrets when you're done. And even if you come out of, a do-it-yourself Alaska remote with no animals, you gave it your all when you were up there. You had the adventure of a lifetime. You're probably with one of your best friends in the world, and it was worth it. It just was.
Absolutely. It's part of living life to the fullest, and what you get out of that hunt is, you come back with more perspective, and you have adventure in your life. You feel like you're living life. And so I'm with you. Every adventure I've ever taken, I've never regretted it. In the end, I've grown from it, and it makes me a stronger person as well. Testing my limits like that, it makes life easier. Pretty soon, if somebody cuts me off on the highway, I'm not so quick to get upset. It's like, that isn't a big deal. I've been in Alaska and I've been around grizzly bears. Like, that's a big deal. That's life and death. Like, this guy cut me off. I slow down. I'll still get home. I'll still get to work. It's just not that big of a deal. But it gives me perspective in my life. It gives me passion in my life, and it keeps me in good shape as I train, and this good shape and this healthy lifestyle, you're going to be able to live longer and be able to share this with your kids and share adventures with your kids. But really, I'm so fortunate that I do have passion in life and something that I do want to work hard for and save for, and this great adventure that I'm going to go on. Like, whatever. I think that's the essence of life, and no matter if it's, backcountry bow hunting that you like, or if it's hunting you like, or mule deer or elk, or whether it's tennis or golf or whatever it is, but having that passion in life is everything, and has made me the man I am, and the father I am, and husband I am. So I never regret going on these adventures, and just want to do more in the future. But guy definitely has to budget for one like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head with perspective. And when seriously hard times in life come, whether it's somebody gets cancer or somebody has you lose your job or whatever, it's some of these little life lessons you learn in the backcountry that really help you ascertain perspective. That you know that the sun's going to come up tomorrow. I can get through this. And, I've been through some serious situations, and this is not a big deal. I can manage it. And there's a guy that I know here in our town in northern Wyoming where the Eastman's office is. He actually goes to our church, and he's a good mechanic in town and everything. He's just a wealth of information. And one of his famous sayings is, "I've seen a big deal, and this ain't it." He says that all the time when people get all worked up about stuff. He says, "I've seen a big deal, and this isn't it." It's a great saying to keep in mind.
I really like that saying. I've heard Ike say that.
Yeah, in fact, that's where we all got it from. It was from this gentleman. His name is Paul, and he's witty and full of little one-liners like that.
Oh, it's great. Well, thanks so much for sharing the adventure with me, Brandon. It's always so fun to talk with you, and I'm glad we were finally able to put this together and share our experiences up there, and hopefully we help other guys shorten their learning curve in float hunting Alaska. Yeah, definitely. And anybody that's listening, don't hesitate to email anybody in our office and ask these questions if you're going on an adventure like this. Well, I mean, we're not guides or outfitters or anything like that, or a licensing service, but we just like to help people be successful. We have the advantage to being able to do this for a living, and hopefully, cut out some of the painful mistakes that we've made over the years, and even people before us made over the years, and help your once in a lifetime or twice in a lifetime adventure trip become not only a reality, but it's safe and it's fun and it was rewarding, and not have to relearn all the same lessons that all of us have done doing it. I mean, like they say, if you fail to learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it, and there's no sense in relearning dumb mistakes. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. So thanks a bunch, Brandon. We'll talk to you soon. Sounds good, Brian. Appreciate it. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks to Brandon Mason for recording the podcast. Like I say, I always really enjoy talking to that guy. So that was a fun one. Float hunting Alaska. It's just a great way to see that vast wilderness and vast open spaces that Alaska has to offer. So really cool one to sit down with Brandon. Sponsor for today's show was Bloodsport Arrows. So again, just great straightness tolerances, weight tolerances. Their components are good. So I've had good luck with their arrows. Really impressed by their broadheads. Both their straight expandable and then their hybrid Gravedigger has done me right. And also their fixed blade. If you're a fixed blade guy, they've got a good 3-blade fixed blade that I used in Idaho this year. So make sure to check those out. We did have, that I was really proud of that Idaho TV show that came out, my Idaho mule deer hunt from this year, where I had my buddy Dan Heavrin video it for me. I sure think that turned out cool. It's like the first one that I was proud of the other ones, but this one I think does a really good job of portraying the backcountry spot, the backcountry hunting. You get your chance to film and you're on all these great adventures, and you just think, gosh, if I just get a chance to capture this and show the audience like how neat this backcountry hunting is and the adventures that we have back here, and you get your chance and you're not comfortable talking into a camera and you don't know the right shots to get, and it's really tough to put together, but I've been gaining experience, and this last one in Idaho, I am really proud how it came out. So we did get a few negative comments, so I do all my filming and then pass it on to my editors, and I had done a segment on expandable broadheads and how they open and to make sure you check the tension, and just did it in my garage because I also was filming an elk hunt here in Montana and some different hunts, and so Eastman's, the editor, when they edited in the expandable broadhead along while hunting in Idaho, which is a fixed blade only state, and so it just wasn't a very good. It was just something that got missed. So I think we were able to change it out, but I did get a couple comments on that. And yes, I did use fixed blades in Idaho. I worked really hard to get them to shoot good out of my bow and shot that buck with a fixed blade. So it was just a matter of editing those clips together that made it look like I used an expandable, but no big deal. It's just that's part of it when you have me putting together all the footage and then sending it to the editor, and I didn't get a chance to pre-look at anything, but it came out really good. I'm really proud of the episode, so that was really neat for me to get that opportunity and then to be able to arrow a nice buck. So pretty cool. Make sure you check that out. Over there at Eastman's, I did see a new deal where we have both magazines, 12 issues for $20 for the entire year. Make sure you take advantage of that, guys. Right now, putting in for out-of-state hunts, we have our MRS section, Members Research Supplement, that comes when you're a subscriber to Eastman's. So, I mean, for $20 to be able to learn what tags are good in other states and even just to look for future applications. Maybe you're not right, and maybe it's not ready. You're not ready, or it's not right this season, but it will be next season. And so, to gain that information year after year, it kind of lets you know the trends of these units. So I use it. It's a great resource. So make sure to check out that deal through Eastman's. I think I saw the ad on Instagram. So I'm sure you can click on it from there, or go to eastmans.com, and I saw that deal, $20 for both magazines. That's a heck of a deal. So I might renew my subscription as well. So that's it. That's the episode. Let's see. We got the sponsor. What's going on at Eastman's? Yeah. Thanks again to Brandon. Always thank you guys for all the support. The podcast has really taken off. We saw some great growth last month. It's the most downloads we've ever had. So it's really neat to see this venture grow and see you guys so passionate about it. I did a new question and answer today about a backpack episode that I want to do, that I'm going to record after this one. The feedback was just amazing. I got 20 or so questions to answer on there, and it's just great, this community that we're building, and hopefully we're all making each other better, and the guys that are willing to put in the work are going to find that success. So I really appreciate it, guys. Keep working hard towards your goals, and check in with you next week.